We're going to record today's call as well, so that for those campuses who were unable to join us, UC Berkeley being one, UC Irvine being another, that they are able to access these resources later on as well. So now let me try sharing one more time and let me know if you can see my screen. Yep. Great. Okay, so let's go ahead and start with our post-declaration toolkit. This is a resource that we came out with a couple years ago, and it's something that oftentimes universities and colleges that are declared, we won't really present this until after you've earned the designation, because at Fairtrade campaigns, we do realize that there's a lot of work that goes up into just earning the designation itself. And so we want to make sure that we're presenting the resources that we have available for you all in a very strategic way. So many of you won't have seen this, and that's okay. And I will be sending this out in follow-up to the call. But this resource was really designed to present kind of a full package of all of the different initiatives, options for expanding your commitment post-designation. So you have here increased impact, institutional purchasing through procurement policies, which we'll go into in a moment in some more detail. That is an area where we have put in a lot of resources and time and effort working with campuses post-designation. And the reason really being that, to all of you, it's no surprise that Fairtrade has huge potential impact through universities with the large purchasing power of campuses. And so, when you're working on becoming a Fairtrade campus, you're getting the core requirement completed, the 2 products per outlet. With procurement, what we're thinking is how can we take that foundation and really expand it so that you actually have perhaps Fairtrade coffee or tea as the default in catering. That's a really wonderful way to expand your commitment, and just thinking about, again, the impact back to small producers, to farmers. When you have something as the default and it doesn't need to be requested, the Fairtrade version, we can actually run the numbers and do calculations on the impact back to producers through a commitment like that, because we know what the premium, for example, for coffee is. It's 20 cents per pound. So we can actually help campuses tell those stories and tell those impact stories, which we want to do a lot more of. So that's something that I can work with you individually on. But increasing your impact through procurement is something that we're really focusing in on, especially this coming year. There's a lot of different ways you can go about this, and we'll get into this a little bit more when we share the resources. I definitely think this is an area where, Leslie, to your point, really working in partnership with your procurement office is, of course, an absolute necessity. Sometimes for solely student-led campaigns, or student-led campaigns that maybe just have like one advisor, one faculty member, this can be a hurdle. I definitely think that there is a lot of benefit to having either a strong staff or faculty member involved in the campaign, or actually, as some of the campaigns on this call are structured, being run through dining. So once you're in dining services, once you're working in sustainability, because it's a lot easier to have these conversations and to get the ball rolling. So we'll talk about procurement a little bit more later on, but we do have several resources, including a campaigner's guide to procurement, a purchasing guide for staff, for procurement staff, as well as model procurement policies, both supplemental and full, which we'll talk about the difference in a moment. And we run some webinars too, which we have some recordings on. Another way that you can expand your commitment post-designation, I mentioned it a little bit a minute ago, sales, so just measuring your direct impact. So, as I said, for each Fairtrade product sold, there is a premium generated back to farmers and workers through that sale. Now, the premium is different for each product. It's not going to be the same for coconut as it is for coffee or tea, because the production of those products is so different. But we do have the core calculations at our hands for things like coffee and tea. So if that's something where you can send to me for example, the volume purchased of coffee, maybe in the year since you've been designated, in the last academic calendar year, then we can easily do that equation and calculate how much premium dollars was generated for producers abroad. Unfortunately, we're unable to do that calculation with the dollar spend at the moment, so that has been a bit of a limitation. I do know a lot of campuses report in different ways, but certainly for that volume amount, we can help you get those numbers. I also want to point in this section to our Advocacy for Long-Term Impact Guide. This is something that we just came out with about a month ago, and it's something that actually our National Student Leadership Committee, a group of 5 student leaders from across the country, put together, and really runs through a lot of these ideas that are in this toolkit, but also with a strategic focus on leadership and how to maintain membership in your campaign. So I will also send that out as well, along with the toolkit and other resources. Product availability and variety. I heard someone mention this in the introductions. Once you have those 2 products at each outlet, some of you I know have more. You've gone above and beyond, which is great. Can you just source more products in the individual outlets? So whether that's through procurement or not, I think if it's through procurement, it's definitely a stronger commitment in that it is embedded in policy on campus. But are there opportunities to just make 1 or 2 smaller switches, maybe for the time being? One area where we've seen this really take off with our designated campuses is around apparel. Apparel and Fairtrade clothing has become of great interest to a lot of our designated campuses. And what we've seen is, in particular, student groups and Fairtrade campaigns deciding to take 1 or 2 options in their bookstore. So they're, t-shirts, every campus has, the t-shirts or the sweatshirts with the logo of the campus, and have that converted to Fairtrade certified cotton or a Fairtrade certified factory produced product. And so that's something where we've seen, just one product being shifted, maybe even just one SKU or one design, but great impact from that to Fairtrade factory workers. And then education and awareness. So a couple different ways that you can pursue this post-designation. A lot of you have been doing a ton of educational outreach and events, so you're well versed in this, but we kind of look at this in 2 buckets. One is Fairtrade in the classroom. So can you actually start incorporating Fairtrade into curriculum on campus? I know Danielle at ASU is working on designing a 1-credit course right now on Fairtrade. Which is a really unique way to, again, have Fairtrade education offered for a wider group of students. But we also have a Fairtrade film and book list. We have several videos now up on our YouTube channel from all of our Fairtrade Month webinars and other presentations. So I think that more and more there's a lot of ways to incorporate Fairtrade in the classroom, not necessarily in an entire chapter or an entire, part of the curriculum, but just even as you're exploring other topics like, human rights or environmental sustainability, or even in an economics class. So there's definitely some kind of shorter options for that as well that don't need to be kind of full courses, but can just be 1 class session. And then educating dining services. So we've developed a suite of what we're calling our Fairtrade 101 fact sheets. I'll also send those in the follow-up. I know many of you have worked with them before. And the goal of those is to really be able to provide accessible and digestible talking points for dining services staff and for front of house dining staff, but also for your fellow campaigners and team members to be able to talk about Fairtrade. So if you have, coffee on campus and tea, we have a 101 fact sheet on coffee and tea, really just talking specifically about those products. We also have them now for coconut, for sugar, for cocoa, for apparel. So it can be a really helpful way to just kind of hone in. Fairtrade can be very broad in that, we do have the social, environmental, and economic component. So we have a Fairtrade 101 as well. But finding more and more that, especially within dining services, there's a desire to talk about 1 or 2 specific products that they're offering. And I think it was Valerie, you mentioned that you had paired the Halloween event with the Cocoa 101, right? So we're also finding a lot of times that when there's these moments throughout the year to really bring attention to the injustice within an existing product, but then highlighting Fairtrade as the alternative, that's been really helpful as well. Similarly here, incoming students. So we've seen some really great examples. Colorado State is one of them, of campuses that have decided to incorporate Fairtrade into the new student orientation. So at Colorado State, each student that arrives on campus gets kind of a small crash course presentation by the committee on what they're up to. We've also seen campuses like UC Berkeley incorporate Fairtrade into their new student orientation, which is a really great way to have new students on campus understand right away that the campus is a fair trade university, and what does that mean? On a larger campus, this can be trickier. I know that if we're talking about doing this at an Arizona State or a Texas A&M, you know, it's a whole nother ball game, but I still think there's opportunities to incorporate fair trade in small ways into new student orientation, particularly if they're in front of products or there's coffee or tea involved in those events. So another area of post-designation, and the last one we'll touch on here, is just expanding the movement. So I think one of the unique features of fair trade campaigns, our organization, is that we do work with all of these different campaign types. And so while universities is, of course, the fastest growing, and I'm sure, again, it's no surprise to all of you that universities and campuses, students are out there making the change that we need to be seeing. But we also work with K through 12 schools, with towns, and with congregations. And so one of the areas where we've really put in a lot of effort and time is working with local schools. So we'll talk about this in a moment, one of our resources for cross-campaign collaboration. But is there a high school nearby that you think is well positioned to work on fair trade? Do you have a fair trade town campaign where you live or nearby? And so those are the connections that we can make for you. I know that Valerie, and not to put you on the spot, maybe you can share in the Q&A, but I know in Fond du Lac, they've really done a real good job of this and making sure that the universities in the area that are working on fair trade are also connected to the Fond du Lac Town campaign. There's even a school in Fond du Lac working on fair trade. There's some congregations working on fair trade, right? So in these areas where we have kind of a hub, I should say, of fair trade advocacy, can we be connecting across campaign types? I also think that particularly with students, this is a really wonderful opportunity for leadership and for some professional development skills, because if you're going and speaking to a high school, one, public speaking experience is always a good thing, but also, you know, that can kind of be sort of like a mentorship position as well, I think, for a student group from a college to a high school. So it's something that we've definitely been working on promoting more. And then in addition, I would just say build new partnerships on campus, right? And so, you know, are there other departments, offices, clubs that are not currently aware of the fair trade campaign? You know, it might not even be on their radar, but they're working on similar issues. And can you build solidarity with them and connect across those issues? One of these areas that I've seen some real success with is around food insecurity on campus and food pantries. And so trying to connect the issues of food insecurity on campus to food insecurity within producer communities, having the Fair Trade Campaign collaborate with and support those efforts of student groups that are working on building out food pantries on campus and really building out some of the, again, just drawing those connections between issues that, you know, producers are facing abroad and that we're facing here in our communities in the U.S. And then last but not least, mentor a new campaign. So as I mentioned, you know, we do have these 4 other campaign types. And I think one of the real values of a campus is that you are in a community. Every campus is in a community. And so I know sometimes there's this kind of push-pull between the university and the town that it sits within. But I think that there's a lot of ways that particularly students are able to go out and engage with the community in meaningful ways through fair trade. So, you know, I would say start to scope and see, you know, do you have fair trade coffee shops or fair trade businesses? 10,000 villages is typically in a lot of cities and towns. Can you maybe start having some students or committee members volunteering with those businesses, with those organizations, and then have them come and speak to the campus, right? So we're talking about this kind of two-way street of collaboration. Before I move on to procurement, we'll just look at those resources and then we will look at the connecting campaign types briefly. Any questions on anything in the guide, or maybe any thoughts or anything it kind of resonates with what you're currently doing on campus?
Our campaign is actually working on building somewhat of a partnership with the Fairtrade Cafe in downtown Phoenix. And so we were hoping to maybe table with them on a first Friday, I believe, in February. And that's like a big event where like some of the streets in Phoenix are shut down, and vendors are selling goods, and there's artwork everywhere. And it brings a lot of people out. So we were hoping to maybe set up some educational resources in their cafe as people come in and purchase coffees and teas. So.
That's great. Thanks for that, Daniela. And that reminds me of one partnership that I did not mention, which you're also working on. Maybe you could just speak to for a moment, which is that we do have Fairtrade certified farms in the U.S. now. It's an emerging group that we're working with, and the first and largest Fairtrade certified farm is actually in Arizona, Wholesome Harvest, and then we also have a couple others kind of scattered throughout the country. But that's an area where I think that so much of really where the passion and interest and inspiration for working on Fairtrade comes from. I think it's from understanding the Fairtrade's impact on the ground, right? And so there's really no better way to experience that than firsthand. Of course, we cannot take all of our students all the time to Ecuador or to South America, or to Africa to be able to actually witness Fairtrade. And so as much as we can, making those connections in the United States. Daniela, do you want to just share for a moment your recent kind of scoping of that partnership?
Sure. So it's in the very preliminary stages, but we're working on busing not only students from ASU, but from NAU, Northern Arizona University, out to Covili Farms, which is a Fairtrade farm. Is that part of Wholesome Harvest? I'm not sure.
So they're a separate farm, but also Fairtrade certified, yep.
Okay, so Fairtrade certified farm, and building a partnership that would include both touring and possibly volunteering with them, depending on what their needs are, and getting students to understand what Fairtrade looks like on the ground. So we're excited about that.
Yeah, no, we look forward to staying in touch on that. It's a really unique partnership, and we haven't really seen a partnership like that yet, just because Fairtrade certified farms in the U.S. are fairly new. We haven't had a lot of campaigns in places where they're operating, like Arizona. So we'll report back to everyone on ASU's partnership with Covili. Great. Well, let's go ahead and move on to procurement then. I do want to spend kind of the bulk of the rest of our time looking through some of the resources that we have around Fairtrade procurement. Fairtrade procurement is something that, depending again on where you go within the university, can be a bit more of a challenge, or it can be quite easy. And it really depends on your campus and how receptive they've been to Fairtrade. One of the pieces that I really want to highlight for you all today is this Campaigner's Guide to Procurement, the Fairtrade Guide for purchasing staff, and then our Model Supplemental Procurement Policy, and our Model Full Policy. And I will send all of this out in follow-up to the call as well. So we have developed this guide a few years back now for food service purchasers. So, Leslie, this is something that would probably be beneficial for you to get in front of your procurement office staff, in particular if you're having those conversations now. And what it does is it really just runs through, how you would embed Fairtrade into a procurement policy, how you would actually, if you wanted to pass a new policy specifically on Fairtrade, through the lens of food service, right, and through the lens of procurement. Most often what we focus on with these policies is coffee, tea, sugar, and cocoa. They're the most commonly found Fairtrade products on campus, and they're also the easiest to procure as Fairtrade certified. So, we really aim to provide some tips and best practices for food service, for procurement staff, but through the lens of those products. Now, I won't go into this too much because it's frankly very technical and really truly is designed for procurement staff, but it is here, including some initial talking points around why buy Fairtrade. So the procurement staff that you're working with on campus, they might know what Fairtrade is, but they might not be as invested in sourcing Fairtrade and advocating for it as you are. So there's definitely a kind of introductory process of getting them to understand what Fairtrade is and why it's important. And then also understanding you know, what kind of products within each of these product commodities can you source, right? So you can have multiple kinds of tea, many different kinds of sugar, many different options for coffee, right? It doesn't just have to be coffee in the urn at the dining hall. And then the other piece that I'll run through just briefly is our model fair trade procurement policy for universities. So this is a full standalone policy. It's something that we have available for campuses to take and create their own fair trade procurement policy. Now, this is designed for if you want to pass a separate full policy. A lot of campuses will actually decide to go the route that we'll talk about next, which is around just incorporating fair trade into an existing policy. That's oftentimes easier, and we do have some really great resources for that. But this takes you through kind of what you would pass if you wanted to just take this and then craft it for your campus. So you've got some important things here around definition of fair trade, scope of coverage, exemptions. This is really important. This is something that your procurement staff will really take note of, which is that we can put in pieces here where it says that, you know, in the case of fair trade products unavailability, or if a product is going to require a cost increase greater than 15%, that they can make an exemption, right? And so we need to have this flexibility in these policies. Similarly, around data collection and performance reporting, we're working on designing a reporting system for fair trade procurement in the next year or so to be able to give you opportunities to report back on how your campus is procuring fair trade, how your sourcing has increased. And then again, supplemental policies. So let's say you already have a procurement policy in place. I'm sure Arizona State, this is the case with you, Texas A&M, UW-FDL, actually probably all of your campuses already have a procurement policy in place. In that case, you might just want to simply put in some fair trade language, right? So the scope language here, we have it in 4 versions: environmentally preferable, sustainable food, we have sweat-free. So again, you know, you don't need to always reinvent the wheel, but you can simply put this into an existing policy. I'm going to go ahead and pause there. I'm not going to dive too much into this connecting campaigns across campaign types. We did cover it in the post-designation toolkit, and I want to make sure that we can wrap up on time, but I will send this in the follow-up. As I said, this is an opportunity where thinking about where you are, if you do know that there's high schools in the area that might be interested in fair trade in particular, I think that's a really good opportunity, or the local town community as well. And at this point, I want to see if anyone has any questions, anything kind of top of mind from hearing about some of the procurement resources or some of the post-designation resources and opportunities, and then I'll just speak a little bit about reporting, and then we can wrap up the call. Well, I guess I was very clear then. Okay, well, great. If you do have questions, you know, I'm always here via email to chat. So just if you think of something later, let me know. So before we move on to reporting, one thing to highlight that I didn't cover, which is around our programs. So I know many of you are participating in our annual programs, Fair Trade Finals. I heard a couple of you mention in the introductions. That's something that we expect campuses to just continue doing in order to maintain your designation, but also we want to provide easy opportunities to raise awareness around fair trade. So those Fair Trade Finals kits, you know, the goal of those is to really be able to take the work away from you and say, okay, we're going to give you the product samples, we'll give you the materials, just find a high traffic venue for the event. So with those events, I would say as much as you can partner with other groups post-designation and maybe try and find a real high traffic area like your main dining hall, you know, can you get, you know, thousands of students in front of those products as opposed to just a handful coming by the table? That's always a really good goal as well. And then last but not least, reporting. So in May, you'll all get an annual report, a request from us. It's just a Google survey online. Shouldn't take very long to complete it all, about 30 minutes, maybe 45 minutes max. And we'll just ask you what you've been doing throughout the year to continue your fair trade commitment and to maintain your status. So it'll ask you who your team members are, Do you have any shifts to the products you have on campus? What products are offered through catering? What events have you held? Have you had any examples of fair trade in the classroom? And then are you working on procurement? So we'll take a question in there around that as well. And again, I'm available to answer questions on the survey as it comes out. And you won't receive that until most of you April, because we want to give campuses one full year of being designated, a full academic year, I should say, before we ask you to fill that out. And unless anyone has any final questions, I think we can probably leave it at that. And look, we even wrapped up 5 minutes early. But thank you all for joining. It was really wonderful to connect, and we're really looking forward to supporting everyone in your fair trade journeys as declared universities.